Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, coming at you today with a video where we're going to be breaking down the top 8 deck list for the 1K at Lootbox games. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. Now we're going to be looking at the actual decks themselves, kind of analyzing the individual card choices as well as some of the strengths and weaknesses of those decks. If you have any questions, make sure you hit me up in the comments down below. Without further ado though, let's jump into those deck lists. All right, the first one I'm going to look at is the 1K from Ohio. The store was Lootbox Games. The first deck we're going to look at here is the Amber Steel list here. I think it's been coined the Steel Song deck list here. And these focus around the core cards of Ariel, Spectacular Singer, and her ability to not only search up additional songs, but being able to sing some of the 5-drop songs like Grab Your Swords on turn 4 against those aggro matchups. Now they are looking to capitalize on like high toughness characters as well. As you can see, we have Tinkerbell, Moana, Cerberus, and even the 7-drop Stitch, and really capitalize on being able to use them as a draw engine for Rapunzel. Certainly not a budget deck list at all, as the entirety of the draw engine is legendary in the Rapunzel and the Stitch, but it also contains some of the higher super rares in the set as well, with Tinkerbell and the Ariel. So kind of what the deck does, it's just as a snapshot here, it really uses these Captain Hooks and Prince Erics to control the early game. As a 1-drop and a 2-drop respectively, they have the ability to challenge all the way up to some of the 4-drops in the game, which can really slow down whatever your opponent is doing. One Prince Eric can really stall the board for a while by himself. With that 3 willpower, he can really survive through a lot of favorable exchanges. Looking at getting into the Ariel on curve or the Tinkerbell on curve, so that one, we can get the Ariel who replaces herself by either hitting a Be Our Guest, Part of Your World, Hakuna Matata, or Grab Your Swords in hand, and then being able to sing any of the songs in the deck to save that additional cost. Tinkerbell obviously looking to shift into the big Tinkerbell. If you can go turn 3 Tinkerbell and shift into turn 4 into the big Tink against an aggro deck, that is very, very hard for them to recover from. The Hades really in here is to just kind of reset if your opponent is able to address any of your early threats. If you can get back a big Tink, if that's what you need, if you can get back a Beast to blow up another item that they've played, or get a Stitch back for the additional card draw. Really just as a singleton of there, just kind of a toolbox card to go back and get one target back out of the discard pile. Rapunzel here is obviously going to be a 4 of, as she is the deck's main draw engine, looking to capitalize on those favorable early exchanges with these 3 willpower characters here to draw 2 cards off of those, or your late game exchanges, being able to challenge with a Moana or get a Moana challenged, and if they don't take care of her immediately, being able to play a Rapunzel and heal that additional damage. Most times though, she is going to be healing after you as the active player challenge, because if your opponent knows what they're playing against, they really shouldn't be leaving any damage on any of your characters unless they're really trying to set up for an amazing second turn, but it's pretty risky if they know you're playing Amber. Hans is just a great lore generator with a great ability. Helps pick off like Lilos behind Simba's, or just finish off damage that may be left on a character after a big Tink comes through. Just a great all-around card, and he's inkable to boot. Moana really is just in here for this really high willpower and a 3 lore generator, which is not a bad thing, but she's not in here for her ability at all to restand characters. It may come up once in a blue moon with your Rapunzel and your Ariel, but for the most part she's in here because she has 6 willpower and 3 lore generation. If they can't challenge and kill her in one turn, then you're going to come in and heal a lot of that damage with the Rapunzel, which which is what you're kind of hoping for in those situations. Beast is a 4 of. You see this a lot now in the steel decks as a lot of the greedier control lists are playing a lot of items in there to help draw out of poor hands. This guy comes in here and turns that off. Cerberus is a more recent addition to these Amber Steel list, and I think it's really just the favorable trades that he's exchanging for. He's got a big body at 5. I personally prefer to go with Kronk at 6 or the Taka at 6, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your individual steel deck. Kronk just trades with a lot of the characters that this guy does not for the 1 additional cost. He's also a 2 lore generator in Kronk versus a 1 if you do just end up needing to play something else onto the field to generate lore. But he trades with cards like Elsa, Spirit of Winter. He trades favorably with Cerberus, and just a number of other cards that he can survive exchanges with and finish off a little bit better than the 5-6 stat line that Cerberus has. But again, you're looking for a character that can challenge and then be healed by your Rapunzels here. Big Tink, I don't think I really have to explain her much. She's in there for pretty much any favorable exchange you can think of. And the 7-drop Stitch here is kind of your late game draw. I'll be honest with you, there are some times where you don't even worry about the draw. You're looking for that, again, 8 willpower attached to that 2 lore generation. 4 copies of Smash. Again, it's inkable and removal. Just kind of a no-brainer in its inclusion. You Have Forgotten Me. I am surprised to see this one only at a 3 of in the deck. This card is very, very good against the Ruby Amethyst control list, which I think are probably going to be one of your more unfavorable matchups, as they don't really do a lot of damage to your characters. So your Rapunzel draw engine's kind of turned off. So I am surprised that they only run this as a 3 of rather than a 4 of. It is inkable, so even in the other matchups, you can always just throw it into your inkwell. But again, I don't know, it's going to make a huge difference at the end of the day having 3 copies versus 4. 4 copies of Be Our Guest. This is a song that can get hit off of Ariel. It can also help tutor any of the characters that you may need to kind of finish off whatever combo or answer you're needing at that time, or just be a card in your inkwell. Part of Your World is kind of the 2nd and 3rd copy of Hades, but it is searchable off of Ariel. Same function as Hades here, just getting back a piece of the puzzle that you may have already lost at this point in time. Playing it to get another Rapunzel down to heal something and draw again is always going to be a nice late game play. Hakuna Matata, you are running enough toughness in this game that you may play this card from time to time, but the reality is it's in here as a inkable card that can be searched for Ariel, just so you don't whiff on her ability. And I could see this card really most likely getting upgraded with the addition of set 2 if this deck persists to just any other card in this color combination that would be inkable and possibly have an effect that could go off. And then we have Grab Your Sword, which is just that amazing card that just comes down and hits your opponent for 2 damage. Again, being able to play this a turn earlier against some of the more aggressive lore generating decks is very nice. Being able to sing it on 4 and then play it on 5 is very nice. Just an all-around great card. And again, the fact that you can search it off of Ariel is not too bad either. Imagine we'll see this list a couple times throughout it, but I wanted to kind of break down the card choices. I don't think we'll see a whole lot of variance from list to list, but give you an idea. If I see a card in another list, we'll kind of talk about its role specifically. The next one on the list here is an Amber and Sapphire list. This one, similarly to the Steel Song list, is looking to capitalize off of kind of characters with high willpower to heal with Rapunzel. It is playing the 1-drop Stitch and Flounder. I'm surprised to see the 1-drop Stitch here, but no 6-drop Stitch to ramp into. And again, not necessarily for his ability adoring fans, but because he would have a higher willpower, good lore generating character. But as you can see, he's looking to kind of capitalize on these high willpower characters that generate a lot of lore and can come in and answer it. It's going to play very similarly to the Steel Song list. You do have access to Felicities to help kind of create some more favorable trades. These 1-drops could trade all the way up into a 5 willpower character. Jasmine with the extra healing in the deck as well. It sounds like it could work. It also sounds like it could be too much healing. I feel like I would regret actually activating her ability and then drawing a Rapunzel next turn. That could have healed that character as well and then actually netted me card draw off of it. But it could create some board states with like Maximus and Simba's, where if your opponent's just trying to kind of go wide and take care of those characters, that they have to kind of overcommit into them. Activating like a Felicities on a Simba to have him challenge something and he survives, and then being able to play a Jasmine behind it to heal it is probably going to be a pretty good play most times, even if you don't get the card draw off of it. Now, what it gains over the Steel Song list is the hard removal in like Hades and Let It Go, which is something that Steel does lack. They don't have a way to just take care of like a big character without either challenging it or just doing small amounts of damage through various other actions. And it does have a little bit more lore generation in the 5-drop Maleficent, as well as with the Eye of Fates item that they're playing over here. It does lose, though, the ability to take care of a large board. If your opponent does go wide early on, this deck could struggle to keep up and really could have some hard times playing second against some more of those aggressive decks that are out there. The next list we have here is a very similar build. It looks like he put in a few Moanas just to kind of up the lore generators in the deck. Also included 2 copies of the Scar. Now, I'm not entirely sure where the Scar in the current meta kind of falls. I mean, he's a 2 lore generator. However, at a 6-drop and only having 5/4 stats, I feel like you probably have access to better lore generators at that point. I don't know if this deck is looking to trade up to really big characters that often, but if you needed to, this deck has the ability to come in and play this Scar. And I mean, that takes Maleficent, which is one of the bigger attack characters that we see in the game right now, all the way down to 2, which will allow her to pretty much survive anything at this point in time. One thing I will mention with these builds, and this one does run the 1 jump ahead, and I mentioned this in one of my other videos, being able to get ahead on some of these bigger late game plays versus like the Ruby Amethyst control list. I mean, playing 1 jump ahead on 2 and then either having or having Mickey Mouse on 3, getting down a turn earlier or catching up at least to the curve of a Ruby Amethyst deck list can really help. And I will say that these higher willpower characters are a real problem for Steel decks to deal with as well, because they don't have those straight removal spells like Let It Go or Hades. You know, if you're talking about this Stitch coming down versus a Steel deck, that is 8 damage, which is very hard for them to deal with in any capacity, really. Alright, next one up is another Steel Song list. Nothing too crazy on this one. They do run the 4 copies of the You Have Forgotten Me and 4 copies of Stitch, dropping the Hades completely and dropping the Part of Your World down to 1. I do tend to, when I test, play closer to those numbers. While I do like kind of the access to this ability in my deck, I find that I use it very sparingly. And most often than not, would rather this really just to be about any other card in the deck off of the top. Because it basically is just adding 3 cost to something that has already been dealt with prior to that. And you're kind of hoping that they haven't dealt with anything too substantial at that point in time. At least not to where, you know, you're playing, you know, you're not going to play 7-drop Stitch, have him removed very easily, and then be able to play 10 to be able to draw the Part of Your World off of this. So I do like it. Again, it usually is going to come to your hand off of a trigger from Ariel and can be played for free. So it's never a terrible draw. I just find out that most often I'm playing it because it's in my hand and not necessarily because I needed to play it. But otherwise, nothing really crazy about this list other than just changing a few of the counts. We have our first Ruby Amethyst list for the day. Now, I've talked about this deck a number of times on the channel, but if for some reason you're not familiar with this list, it is basically just trying to hold off its opponent for the first few turns till it can get to turn 7. Play its Be Prepared to reset the board, and then just continue to play its top-end cards in order to win the matchup, because its top-end cards are better than any of the other decks out there's top-end cards. Its early game is kind of where it's going to be its weakest. Archimedes and LeFou are really just there to kind of pressure those early aggro decks, you know, to restand their Simbas so their Archimedes can swing behind the Simba to take out whatever they need to. And then again, it's going into your Maleficents for its draw engine. Elsa is really there as a shift target for the big Elsa. Now, we'll say this one is running kind of the highest top-end package that you'll really see in the Ruby Amethyst list. 4 Elsas, 2 Ursulas, we got 4 big Aladdins, 2 of the Brave Little Tailors, 4 Maleficents. So very, very heavy top-end here. One of the more kind of greedy lists. If we look at the number of uninkables as well, we've got 4 with the Rafiki, we've got 2 with Ursula, we've got 4 at Elsa, 4 Dragonfire, 4 Be Prepareds, 2 Mirrors, and 3 Ursula's Cauldrons for a total of 23 uninkables, which is a very, very greedy list here. I do tend to try to keep my uninkables lower in this list, especially since you have more people playing disruptive cards like you have Forgotten Me, the 5-drop Beast and Steel, and even a Whole New World to an extent. If you've kind of mulliganed to get that very inkable hand in place, they can just come in and punish you. Like, the existence of those 3 cards just, I think, makes playing this many uninkables very, very difficult to do, but clearly they were able to still top 8 with this list. If it goes off, they have access to a ton of the way more tools than a lot of the other more conservative lists will do. But I do find in my testing, at least anyways, that this is a very greedy build of the deck and can backfire if you get unlucky. We've got our first Ruby Emerald list here. Now, I did a budget version of this deck. This one is clearly not the budget build, with the addition of some cards like the Cusco and the John Silver, even to a lesser extent the 2 copies of Hans here. The premise of this deck is you are going for a lore generation is your win condition, and some hard to deal with characters in the mid game to really sew up the ability to close the game out. Flynn Rider obviously being one of your top priorities in this deck early game, with his 2 lore generation at 2, just very card advantageous. Now, I will say I am surprised to see only 2 copies of the Hans here, as he does come down and generate 3 lore very early. Also, the omission of Mad Hatters entirely are very surprising to me as well. Now, with him instead opting to go for a complete 4 set of his top end here, 4 Genies, 4 John Silvers, and 4 of the big Aladdin. I will say in the time I have played this deck, the uninkable count for this deck is pretty high for what I've tested in the past. Having even 10 in a deck that is looking to not only ink something, but play something every turn from turn 1 to 6, having even 10 cards in the deck can be very problematic. And when I was running a higher count like that in my deck, I found a lot of times I could not play these Genies when they would come into my hand, because I would just run out of cards to ink to get up to 6. So him playing that many and then that many higher drops could run into some issues over a larger number of games, but the cards he's running are all very solid. I do like that John Silver is seeing more play in the format, as I do think his ability is extremely good and his stats are not bad either. I do think he is growing in popularity now towards the end of set 1, and I think with the addition of set 2, we're going to start seeing a lot more of this John Silver. Again, I don't know that I could cut Mad Hatter from an Emerald list right now, but clearly he was able to get a top 8 with his build, so congratulations to him. All right, we've got our second Ruby Amethyst list of the day. This one's fairly similar to the last one that we looked at. It does not run the 3 Ursula's Cauldron. Instead, it is playing the Broom and Mickey Mouse package. I am surprised to see the Singleton Mickey Mouse in there. He is inkable, but honestly, like, the odds of him being an impact card in the deck is pretty low at 1 copy of him, but again, not going to make or break the deck. Now, he is running 2 Befuddles. I'm not a huge fan of that card either. I just think with the current metagame, this card just does not get enough value for the negative card. It is out of your hand, more so than its actual ability. I don't think its ability is bad, per se, for what this deck is looking to do. I just don't think that Ruby Amethyst is getting enough value out of a card in their hand with this card to be playing it. So another one that's not quite as high as the last one, with, it looks like 18 uninkables in this particular build. Still pretty high, and again, with the right disruption packages, could cause some issues. But if you know what you're going up against, and you're comfortable with the deck, and you're comfortable with the mulligans in it, you can get away with some of these more greedy builds that you have out there. Again, pretty much same top end package. He's not playing any of the Brave Little Tailors, which I think is fine. Again, when you kind of hit the top end of this deck, Brave Little Tailor is almost like a win more card, as he just comes in and he's pure lore generation, whereas these other ones are coming into play and doing something and having a high amount of lore generation as well. Again, nothing crazy on this particular build. Some of the counts are a little different than you'll see out there, but overall pretty standard Ruby Amethyst list. And then our last list for this top 8 is actually going to be a Steel Sapphire list, focused around Belle, Strange but Special. Now, this was a very popular list early on in the set 1 metagame, focusing around Belle's ability and the Fishbone Quill's ability to just use every card in your hand as a resource very quickly, and then restock your hand with a whole new world. Kind of fell out of favor for a while there as aggro decks became more popular, and you were not really getting a ton of advantage out of the whole new world and restocking your opponent's hands. But now that more control decks have kind of moved back into the metagame, the whole new world is actually a very disruptive card for them, especially when you're playing it on like turn 4 or 5, depending on the draws that you can have. Now, this one actually plays a bit less ramp than I normally see in these lists, and I am not saying that I am not a fan of that either. Mickey Mouse is actually a pretty bad play most of the time, but I would imagine this deck is probably mulling to see like 1 copy of that in its opening hand, and then just hoping not to see the second copy anytime soon. Now, the Beast addition to these decks does seem a little odd, as it's really in there to take care of the other item draw cards that are out there, which, yes, it can still hit those targets, and yes, it'll still see those targets, but with the addition of the whole new, or with the presence of whole new world in the deck, I don't know that there's going to be a ton of times that they're going to be looking at it to draw into a better hand, as you're going to be keeping their hand probably pretty topped off. Felicities is also kind of a new addition that I had not seen in this particular build before, and I know he does allow for some favorable exchanges. However, I don't know that this deck is super good at challenging in those exchanges to begin with, kind of relying on playing these higher end removal spells ahead of curve, and then just focusing on getting kind of the Aurora and Belle combination out to take it over. But the changes obviously worked out for them, so I'm glad to see this list kind of showing up again. Like I said, it hasn't had much representation in the top 8 here recently, but with this game, everything kind of goes in cycles anyways, so glad that it's kind of getting some play again, as that's really the best deck probably for Belle to be highlighted currently, and everybody wants the, legendary princesses to be good, right? So there you guys have it, the full breakdown of the top 8 deck lists from the 1K. Let me know what you guys think of the list down below, and until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.